The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Hey, welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. You have joined us as we are into the series on America 250 during the month of July as we are highlighting Freemasonry's unique role in the shaping of our country. You can join Craftsman online at craftsmanonline.com as we have partnered up with Arizona State University to promote their really cool program called What the Founders Meant by Happiness, a journey through virtue and character. Now, this course was developed on American history with collaboration from the National Constitution Center. It's 12 modules. It's so much fun. It's appropriate for all ages and honestly, every American. You're going to be able to study the writings of some of our American founders and learn how Freemasonry and self-mastery kind of cross over to create strong leaders. Get started for free at craftsmanonline.com and enjoy some learning this summer. Well, a first for us here on the podcast, we decided to do an over and on the road episode traveling to Johnstown, New York, one of upstate New York's oldest communities. My driver was Right Worshipful Brother Michael Millias, who's also the past master of St. Patrick's Lodge. And our topic, well, one of the biggest figures in colonial American history, at least in the eyes of upstate New York, Sir William Johnson.
How long is our drive?
Oh, this is an hour.
Oh, challenge accepted. It's going to be great.
So I'm out walking the beat one night. That's still a thing that we used to do at that time. And I go to check the doors at the lodge like we do every night as part of our foot patrol. And I find the back door was unlocked and go inside, wander through the building. Nobody's around. The lights are all off. So I call dispatch, have them get a hold of the responsible with a key. Key holder shows up, turns out to be a past master of the lodge and one of the trustees. We stand out on the sidewalk for, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes talking about the building and the lodge in general. And I didn't even really know what masonry was at this point. But I was intrigued by what I saw inside. The building was gorgeous. I kind of always had an affinity for old buildings anyway. I said, what do you have to do to become a member here? And that was it. He goes, you just did it. I'll get you a petition.
When does Sir William Johnson enter your view?
I was familiar with him at that point already, having been interested in history. I'd been up to Johnson Hall because I moved to Johnstown in 2006. Several years later, I was already a member at St. Pat's for a while. We were approaching our 250th anniversary coming up in 2016. At the same time, I was progressing through the chairs. And sometime in there, I kind of got more interested in Sir William and the history of the lodge. I wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about our first master and founder. And so I did some reading. I talked to the city historian whenever I would see him, hearing the stories about how Sir William kind of governed our area and then moved on to after he died, the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. I just got more and more interested in it. The more I read, the more interested I was.
During the month of July, we've kind of highlighting not only famous Freemasons, but also New York State's history in Freemasonry and also with the birth of our country. And we're going to get into, I would say, one of the big figures of New York Masonic history and also the shaping of our country in an interesting way with Sir William Johnson. But I would imagine that most of our listeners are probably going to be like me when you first hear this name, go, why is this person so significant? So if you had to give a really kind of high level or back of the baseball card summary before we get to some of his greatest hits of the stories, like, how do you describe this guy?
Sir William was sent as a young man to the Mohawk Valley by his uncle, who had purchased some land here, the British ship captain, and successful. Had never been to the Mohawk Valley, just sent Sir William out here. And he turned that initial I guess, like opportunity to run his uncle's, to build and run a store and manage his uncle's property, into one of the greatest success stories on the frontier, probably. Many years later, after finding fame at the Battle of Lake George, service to the Crown during the French Indian War, and as superintendent of Indian Affairs, it led to him being granted a baronetcy, which is still a title that's passed from father to son to this day. There is currently a Sir, I think his name is Sir Guy Johnson, living in Canada, who came down to visit actually for the 250th anniversary
Oh, nice.
of the city of Johnstown, not St. Pat's.
So maybe we should start there as well, like where Johnstown is, because you mentioned a key word, the frontier. And it's funny when you would look at a map of America pre-1776, like our colonial time, literally it was these little tiny gobs around the coastline of, from New York, well, what is now New York State, all the way down to the Carolinas, right?
Yep.
Where the early settlements were. So Albany, New York, where we are right now, a little north of us, maybe 10 minutes, would be just woods and forest, and there was nothing up there except the Native Americans.
More or less, yeah, and fur trappers, traders.
Which is funny to us because they would refer to it as the frontier, the wilderness, and now it's where people have their nice second homes on the lakes.
Or the poor people that grew up in the Adirondacks,
Right,
still live and try to make their living there on.
Right, on your way to Canada.
Yeah.
So during this time, obviously this is still horses. This is single fire musket shots. This is, you carried a sword with you. You didn't go into the woods alone, not only because of the unknown bears and other wilderness creatures that were there, but it also wasn't a peaceful, civilized area. There was still battles over territorial land between the white settlers and the natives that were there. And you have this guy who's literally a larger than life figure shows up. And when you share stories of him, and I hear of a guy that's like, oh, I'm going to go check out my uncle's land. And it's like just the forest. Like there was no machetes to chop things down or, clear cutting an area. Like he literally had to survey and make his own way to determine where he was going to start his plumb line point.
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't know if he knew this when he got sent here. He's about 23 years old when he shows up in Mohawk Valley to manage his uncle's property. I don't know that he knew that the property was just that. It was just forest and a river. And there's no land, there's no store, there's no workable land, nothing but a wild area that's completely untamed and unlivable. And so step one, on arriving to York from Ireland, was to chop down trees and clear up an area where they could build some structures to live in, and then start their farm. And you got to get crops going so you have food. I'm sure his uncle sent him with money to start this process. It wasn't from complete scratch, but in the early days of him setting up shop in the Mohawk Valley around what's now Fort Hunter, I'm pretty sure is where, more or less, where this property was. He quickly realized that he's on the wrong side of the river. He sees all of the Palatine Germans and all of the other traders and trappers and the Iroquois traveling on the north side of the river. The soil's better, the sun is on it all the time. It's that's where the main road was going east-west to get back to Fort Orange, which is now Albany. And so he, in realizing that, buys some property for himself on the other side of the river in what would later become Johnstown, and starts to establish his own settlement there. I don't actually know what happened without going back to what happened to the land that was his uncle's. But Sir William starts to create his own settlement there, and in I think it was the 1730s, where he starts to hack another settlement out of the wilderness, and he was very enamored with the Six Nations culture and the Native Americans language and and women, as we talked before. It was
Big fan of the ladies.
yes. And so Sir William starts to create this settlement from scratch. I mean, he was a builder at heart. Even though he was a baronet, he never was somebody who enjoyed being at court, didn't like all the pomp and circumstance. He founds Johnstown. He names it for his son, John Johnson, who would then later follow him as the next baronet, and who was also provincial Grand Master of Masons. So whereas the crown and all of the lords of Parliament understood that they needed the products and the goods and the resources from the colonies, they didn't really care that much about how everyone lived their day-to-day lives or how they felt about it, whereas Sir William always did. I think that was one of the separating factors and sort of shows his true leadership ability.
Now, I'm not going to say that everybody in Johnstown is knowledgeable about Sir William as yourself, but I'm sure there's a lot of local pride still. The plates and the history, and of course, the stories, I'm sure, are there with the people. But when did you start to, and what part of this story did you start personally connecting with, saying, I want to learn more about this guy?
I think it was, like I said before, it was after being master, kind of feeling more connected to the story then, because as part of our 250th, we had planned to have a lodge meeting at Johnson Hall as part of the celebration. So the morning of our rededication, we went to Johnson Hall with the Grand Master, which was Brother Jeff Williamson at the time, and he came with the rest of the Grand Line. We went to Johnson Hall with about 80 brothers that were all gathered in the upstairs hallway. The caretaker there was kind enough to help us set up the lodge room in the hallway. It would have been in the bedroom where they initially had met. Far too many people, to try to cram in there. So we set up a lodge in the hallway, and to sort of relive, having a lodge meeting there, where Sir William had opened the first lodge meeting 250 years prior. And it was, 90-something degrees up there at 11 in the morning, or 10 in the morning when it started. Because no windows open, and it's a colonial era building. But we brought with us our original charter, our original minutes book, those original jewels for the officers, and sitting there wearing that same jewel that Sir William had commissioned, that he wore for the very first meeting, and watching Grandmaster Williamson pass that charter around that was signed by Sir William, passed it around to all the brothers. He gave this beautiful, moving speech, and I can do it no justice at this point. But he talked about the unbroken chain of brotherhood through the centuries, through the ages, as passed this around the room. And I got goosebumps, even though it was, hotter than hell up there.
Yeah,
I got goosebumps sitting there listening to him talk. And, as a young Mason, a young brother, it was just fascinating to be a part of that. And I think a lot of the brothers that were there too at the time felt the same way. And so afterwards, I started, as I said before, talking to our historian and kind of digging more into the subject matter. I just got more and more interested in the history locally, but especially Sir William, because he just always intrigued me that this larger-than-life character who showed up from Ireland, which I love. I love that he was not an English lord that showed up on our shores. He was an Irish farmer sent here to, raise a settlement from up. And the fact that he succeeded and then some, I think he exceeded all expectations of what he would be able to do here on the frontier. Always fascinating. So I wanted to, learn more. And the more I would read, the more I would find out, the more fascinated I was. I was kind of hooked.
I think it's inevitable when you're researching historical figures. For me, I went down a rabbit hole with Thaddeus Kosciuszko. And when you start to research somebody, you're like, I need to see a little bit of myself in this person. Or I want to be a little bit about this guy, the good parts of this guy.
For sure.
So what was it with Sir William where you're like, either I feel like we shared the same plane, or, hey, I want to kind of bring myself up to his level?
So the fact that he was sort of a leader and a builder, but had no interest in any of the fancy parts of being a lord. He didn't really care about that aspect of the baronetcy. It just wasn't, at least from what I've read. He always preferred the frontier life, always preferred being amongst his people, as though he was anyone else. And he always looked out for all the people that were there, the people he loved. And that, for me, that kind of hit home. I felt that, because I don't care that much for the pomp and circumstance of titles and
Aprons.
Aprons as well.
Yeah.
It was more about the meaning of the work and the value of the work.
So anyone I know that researches like a historical figure, there's the historical stories that we all know that maybe made it or didn't make it into the history books. But then there's the cool little gems that you find along the way where you're like, oh, but this is the story. So while you're loading those up, can you give us a couple of them that are like, this is the story that really tells the story of this guy or this time, or like why Sir William Johnson is so important?
There's plenty that have made it the history books, but probably like me, you and several of your listeners have no idea who he is. Never heard the name before. I never heard Sir William Johnson's name until I moved to Johnstown. Even though he played such a key part in the politics and the formation of what is now New York State, he pushed the boundary line further west, interacted with the Indians and really negotiated treaties and settled a lot of affairs with the Iroquois and other nations. But I had never heard of him or read anything of him in history books, at least in school. He's not talked about. And I think it's because he died in 1774. So it's right before the breakout of the Revolution. He dies, which is also why his legacy was preserved. And I think he's still looked at, as the founder of Johnstown, he's still looked at as sort of a frontier hero, versus John Johnson is looked at as a villain. But in Canada, he's a hero. He's a national hero, at least from what it appears as an outsider.
Okay.
And the same can be said of John Butler, because they were community builders. They were Masons. And they continued to do that even after they fled to Niagara and started to build a community there. John Butler was the first senior Grand Court of Canada. After there was a lodge formed there. So, but Sir William, because he didn't make it to the Revolution, his legacy didn't get tarnished in that same way that so many others that picked a side and had to fight. And if they picked the wrong side, they fell into disfavor. They're no longer a hero.
Gotcha.
But his tomb or his burial place still is laid to rest next to St. John's Church, which he built. It's been rebuilt over the years because of fires and various things, but that's where his body was enshrined to his past. Johnson Hall is still there, preserved as a state historic site, now owned by New York State. But it's a beautiful historical residence, and I believe it's the only baronial home in the U.S.
So maybe kind of a George Washington with the leader story, but now I'm thinking more of like a Davy Crockett, a hero of the frontier.
Sort of, yeah. And he really, like I said before, that he never was interested in being a soldier. It just, because of his position, because of his wealth and his ability to recruit the Iroquois and to negotiate with them, his ability to call up settlers and farmers to assist with the militia. He gets made a colonel initially for the militia, and eventually I think it was Major General that he was promoted to, or basically put in command of a very large military unit as part of the French War.
Okay.
Never trained as a soldier. He was not part of the the British regular army, but because of his title and wealth and position, gets put in charge.
Right.
And he's got the leadership ability, and he has the ability to supply his troops and his people and take care of them. But he doesn't know anything about military tactics or setting up a military camp or anything. But he leads his unit, his men, up to Lake George as part of the campaign during the French and Indian War. And the idea being that he's heading to, I think, Fort Ticonderoga, or maybe a little bit north of there, one of the other forts, Crown Point, which was, my memory escapes me, the French name for the fort they have at Crown Point.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the mission. Baron, I'm going to butcher his name, but I think it's Dieskau, is how you pronounce his name. He's the leader of the opposing army. The French army that's marching south, along with a bunch of Huron and other natives, as part of their army. And they get wind that Johnson is on his way, and they ambush him, part of his army that he's marching north. They had set up a camp south of what's now Lake George, south of Fort William Henry.
Okay.
Or what would eventually become Fort William Henry. And gets ambushed by the Baron and his troops in what's called the Bloody Morning Scout. So, I don't know how famous the battle is, but it's a fairly well-known part of the story of Lake George. And from being from that area, my mom's side of the family is all from Lake Champlain, Fort Henry, Ticonderoga area. So I was familiar with like the locations and all of that. Incidentally, Sir William Johnson is the one that named it Lake George. Because before that it was Loch St. Sacrament, something along those lines.
Yep.
Named by the French that had explored it initially. So Sir William names it for his king and called it Lake George. But they get ambushed, and as part of this Bloody Morning Scout, where several of his units get trapped by the Baron, and they fight their way out and retreat back to their encampment. And I think it was because of the artillery that they had some small artillery at the sort of fort that had been assembled and constructed. The Indians were hesitant to attack, to continue to push the fight, because they're very much about preserving life, their own, especially their own.
Right.
They do not replace their warriors as quickly as the white settlers did, or the English army. So they were much more hesitant to rush into a foolish pitched battle or against artillery that they know they don't stand a chance against.
Right.
But that sort of moment of breath for Johnson allowed them to retreat back into behind the barricades and start to open fire on and return fire strongly against the French. And it eventually ended up saving them from defeat. I mean, they're considered the winner of this battle, but it was more of a draw, really, because there was massive losses on both sides. The French brigadiers attack. Dieskau assembles his units of the real French regular soldiers and the brigadiers, and they attack, or the grenadiers, excuse me. They attack the fort. They all get gunned down pretty quick. The artillery and the musket fire is just cutting lanes through the formation of troops, and Dieskau gets wounded. One of the main major leaders for the Iroquois also gets mortally wounded and is never seen again. That was King Hendrick, who was a pretty pivotal figure in among the leaders of the Iroquois at that time, and was a close friend of Johnson's. So he gets killed during this battle, during this ambush, and because the French regulars are all cut down, Dieskau is wounded. Johnson actually saves him from being killed, because one of the Iroquois warriors was getting ready to finish him off and scalp him. Johnson stops that, takes him inside, renders aid. He actually lived for like 10 more years and died. complications from his wounds later. But Johnson took a musket ball to the hip that he never really healed from either, and probably contributed to his death several years later.
What were the sizes of the forces that were teeing off?
I don't remember specifically because they would fight. I think Johnson had marched with a couple thousand.
Okay.
And the French had more than that. They had, I think, 4 or 6,000 troops. But because they were kind of spread out and separated, with like Dieskau didn't bring his artillery south because when he heard about and he waited with his entire army and marched on Johnson, probably would have butchered him. They probably would have wiped him off the map.
Well, having been up to Lake George, and it's a gigantic tourist trap. All I'm thinking about is as the mini haha is making its way around Lake George, the boat that everybody rides on. You would have heard the crack of cannon fire and like muskets and just war parties attacking each other. But it would have just been woods around, not hotels and beach houses or lake houses, and boats that are tied up to docks or tethered to docks out there. That it would have been this extreme violence in a very peaceful, quiet place.
Yeah, there was nothing there. It was literal frontier. There was the Kings Road that went north along the western side of the lake, for Lake George and Lake Champlain, heading on up to Canada, used primarily by soldiers and traders. The fur trappers and traders that would go between Montreal or Quebec and Albany. I mean, that's what that route was for, and there was forts along the way, but that was it. There wasn't really any settlements or towns because it was wilderness. It was wild country. There was no place to get supplies, and there were Indians everywhere.
Right.
So that was would be an issue for settlers as well.
So we've got the story of Sir William the Settler. We got the story of Sir William the military man that was pressed at the surface, but would have rather just stayed as a settler. What about Sir William as the community service, to our Masonic values, the virtuous? How did he help others?
So, in wanting to build a settlement at Johnstown, right? So after the French and Indian War concludes, and he's got even more wealth and influence, and has recovered at least somewhat from his battle wound. He, in trying to build this settlement at Johnstown, he constructs what becomes his final home at Johnson Hall. He builds the first school at Johnstown. He built St. John's Church. Because although Johnson really wasn't a religious man, I think he understood the part religion played for some of his people, and was more of a spiritual individual than a religious. He wasn't Catholic, although I believe he was Catholic by birth.
Right.
But then he was more I think Anglican or later Church of England type of follower. But really, it never played a big part in his life. So he builds St. John's Church. He builds a store. He builds the first school. Brings a schoolmaster to Johnstown to try to begin to educate the children of his farmers and settlers and people, as well as he formed St. Patrick's Lodge, number 4, because he wanted to have a social center for people that would be in his life, in his circle, right? So the men that lived in his community, he wanted them to have a place to socialize, to be sort of the moral center of that, right? Not just because you could have had an tavern be the first social place, but he built St. Patrick's as part of that.
We didn't think that we were going to have, the right time or a frame of mind to have this conversation about Sir William. And I can see now we're pulling up close to the exit here at Johnstown, so I can't wait to see the lodge, see the city, and get some of these things pointed out.
I think it's important to remember his legacy for both Masons and our history for upstate New York. Something we've talked about a lot, and I think is sort of backed up by things I've read and what little research I've done into it. There's a very real possibility that if Sir William doesn't die of a stroke or seizure, or whatever it was that caused his death in July 1774, if he survives into the late 1770s, there's a significant possibility that the revolution goes different.
At least in upstate New York? Or
no, overall.
Wow.
I think Virginia, at the time of the revolution and leading up to it, was one of the wealthiest, most successful colonies. But Johnson controlled, by this time, in the early 1770s, Johnson now has control of the entire Longhouse, which is how the Iroquois referred to their position on the Mohawk, from essentially a little bit west of Schenectady, around the Amsterdam, Johnstown area, all the way out to the Great Lakes was Iroquois territory, and all the way north to Canada. As part of the Adirondacks, each tribe had a different area that they called home, and it was their territory. But combined, the Six Nations went as far north as Canada, down into Pennsylvania, into the Ohio River Valley, as far west as Michigan, or nearly to Michigan. I mean, they really controlled a vast territory, and they were the most powerful and developed culture at the time among the Native Americans. And Johnson was not just their ally, he was a part of their society. They adopted him. They gave him an Indian name. They trusted him. They knew that he looked out for them. And I think that was another way that he really showed that he took care of people, was by always looking out for the interests of the Native Americans.
We had an hour in the car, and again, you're like, "Oh, I'm never going to be in the mood to talk about this." This has been great, and I hope our listeners appreciate. This is our first on the road podcast episode recording. So, right, worshipful brother Michael Millias, thank you for your time.
Absolutely, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to my guest this week, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Millias, our subject matter expert and past master of St. Patrick's Lodge on all things Sir William Johnson. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. If you've enjoyed this conversation, we're going to get some bonus time in the car ride. It was an hour drive from Albany to Johnstown, and we'll have some more on the life and time of Sir William to share this Thursday. If you're not on Patreon, you can join us for a free 7-day trial, find out what it feels like to get ad-free episodes and access to our full back catalog of these subscriber extra episodes. Back to work on Monday, we connect with worshipful brother Wes Latchford to cover the spirit of independence in Freemasonry. That's coming Monday. Until then, let peace and harmony prevail.